Welcome to another vintage fishing reel service video. In this episode we have probably my favorite, if not, at least one of my favorites, but probably my favorite, and that's a Zebco 77 and the old version. And the reason that's my favorite is because this was my first ever fishing outfit as a kid in the 70s, and this one's pretty crusty. It's been sitting in a barn or something, and it's all crusty. But a guy I buy a lot of stuff from knows that I love these things. I don't hoard them. It's not considered hoarding if I actually use them. But yeah. And so he just held this behind and he just gave it to me, which I really appreciate. I love these things. So this one's missing these had a plastic wrap over the wood handle here that was meant to stay there. Kind of looked like a wrapper you might want to peel off, but it was supposed to stay on there. And this is a one piece. In other words, the reel is built into the rod. This also happens to be a one-piece rod, so there's no way to break this rod down. But regardless, some of them you could break the rod into two, but all of them, the reel is built into the rod, and that will become more clear in a minute. But what I want to get into first is a little bit of the history of the things. This is not the only built-in rod-reel combo that Zebco made. There was there's a 101 reel that was a separate reel, but the early 101s I think were built in, and there was a 99 that was built in, and maybe an 88 that were sort of built into the rod like this. Kind of a cool thing. Well, let's just go a little bit through the history. So they made the Zebco 77 from pretty much looked just like this for most of the time, but the model itself, regardless of which version, ran from 1959 to 1996. And they had a continuous anti-reverse, so they had an anti-reverse in there. They had the spools were interchangeable, so you could crack this open and pop off the spool, put a different spool in with different test line. Basically, the idea was that you could have multiple spools, each with a different test line. And you could buy them all separate spools for these already with line on them, and the recommended line test was 4 pound, 6 pound, and 8 pound. Those are the three line tests that they said would operate well in this reel. The rod itself is about it's 50 inches, so from butt to tip is 50 inches. And apparently this plastic is a special kind of supposedly tough plastic called Cycolac. And in some of the advertisements, they advertised that Cycolac was the same kind of tough plastic that the NFL used on helmets and that kind of thing. And quite frankly, I haven't really seen too many of them that are actually broken in terms of the plastic in the reel and that kind of thing. So they first came out with them as I said, in 1959, and that one is so it's got this raised lettering here. Instead of saying Zebco 77, it said Zebco Junior. And even in the catalog, it was just called the Junior. There was no mention of model 77. It was just called the Zebco Junior. And in that first year, I don't think they had any plastic wrap on the handle. I think the handle was just wood. Starting in 59 and lasting for quite a while. I'm trying to think. I think it wasn't until 1970 that they advertised a 4-notch pickup on the spinner head. I'm sorry, 14-notch. So from 59 and probably until 1970, there were only 4 notches on the spinner head. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 1970, assuming that it didn't start before that, because they didn't mention it before 1970, they went to 14 pickups on the spinner head. And so this one for sure then would end up being pre 1970, because it is a 4 notch. Now that's a little different than the transition from 4 notch to many notches on like the 202 and the 404. Those went from 4 notch to 20 notch or whatever, depends on whether you're talking about 202 or 404 as to how many notches they ended up going to. Though that transition occurred like in like 65, but the only time it's really noted that change from 4 to 14 is for the 77 is in 1970. So this one, so in 1960, the very next year that they were made, they still called them Junior, and they were still Junior here instead of 77. But in the catalogs, they started calling Model 77 for the first time. It was also in 1960 that they first started to wrap this handle in a plastic wrap. And the first version of the wrap was white with a bunch of Zebco. It says Zebco in multiple places, diagonal and different positions on the handle. So white with black Zebco put on there a number of times. And then in 61, they dropped the name Junior altogether. Instead of saying Junior on the cone, they put the 77 like you see here. In 1967, let me grab one. In 1967, this was post 1967 for reasons we'll see, but in 67 they put in a ferrule here so that you could break the rod down. You could break the rod in half. So instead of a one piece 50 inch, you could now break it down into about a 25 inch. 2 pieces about 25 inches long. So if you have a rod that's a single rod with no ferrule, no way to break it down, you're looking at a 77 that was pre-67. Then in 1970, as I mentioned, they introduced the 4-point, and I'm just going to pop this one open here, the 14-point or 14 notch spinner head. See all those crenulations there on the spinner head? Instead of 4 pickups, there are now 14, and that was first noted in the literature, in the catalogs in 1970. So I'm assuming that's about the time they upped the number of pickups in the 77s, even though they went away from the 4 notches and the 202s and 404s, etc. in 65. 1973 was the first year that they switched from the white plastic wrap over the wood handle to this, to black with the stripes and the white. And I haven't really looked closely to see if this particular design changed much. It wouldn't surprise me, but at least it was the first in 73 that they went away from that all white with the little Zebco written in there multiple times to this black and white version. And that's basically the last change until in 1980. It was 1980 that they went to basically the same deal, except now the model is green. And there was a little difference, obviously, in the patterning of the plastic wrap. but it went to green, and it went to non-contrasting handle knobs. So the handle knobs are the same color as the cover and so on, and the handle, versus the 1973 through 79, which had contrasting white handle knobs against the black background. And then in 1983, there was a major design change, and change in the drag and everything. So no longer did you have sort of the tension arm spring, or whatever you want to call it, with the drag knob up on, the top of the reel. You now went to a star drag, kind of like the Zebco US 76. Reel still built in, handle looks totally different. Okay, and the rod is still something that you can break down, so it's still a two-piece rod. But so that this remained, the 77 continued to remain, had this general look, general design, until they discontinued them in 1996 and went with the Mickey Mouse cartoony things. What were they? I don't remember what they're called, but kind of a short rod, cartoony. I got one here somewhere. These things were made alongside the 77 for a number of years, but eventually, when the 77 went out, it was these goofy, cartoony ones that were all that remained of the so-called children's outfit type deals. But this one's just a rod, a very short rod, about 25 inch rod. So there may have been a couple of colors. I think at least 2 color versions of this. I think this is the early color version, and then late in the run, it may have gone to a black with a red handle knob. I'd have to do more research on that, and maybe I'll do that when I do a service video on this one. But that's the basic general history on one of my favorites, the 77. And what is a grown man doing hoarding and fishing with 77s? Well, part of it's nostalgia. Part of it is that these make great little ultralight fishing outfits. Like if you want to come an ultralight spin casting outfit and you want a little nostalgia too, and especially if you're a kayak fisherman, these are great. They're little short rods, easy to take out on the kayak, and I've caught some decent fish with them, and I'll be doing a video on fishing with the vintage 1970s versions of the Zebco 77. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and get to servicing this one and getting not only the reel and the interior of the reel, but the rod all cleaned up, looking and working like new. I will say that a lot of these, as in the case with this one, this is not a 1959. It's probably, it is a pre-1970 because it is a 4-notch, and it also probably predates. Well, it's a one-piece, so it would have to be pre-1967. So this should have had a white plastic wrap on it, and it's either worn off or somebody tore it off. Now what I have done with these is I've taken some tractor and implement paint, just dipped it in gloss black tractor paint, and you could, if you wanted to get fancy, you could even get some white pinstripe or something on there and make it kind of look like the original wrap. But I suppose you could get some shrink wrap and try to do it like the original. I don't know, but this thick black enamel paint works good for me, and that's probably what I'll do on this one. One other thing that I wanted to point out, that another difference in these single piece rod versions, so that 1967 and earlier, they had sort of a clicker sound, which I'm not a big fan of. It has an anti-reverse, but it's a different mechanism for the anti-reverse than the ones that were two-piece rod. So if you look at the insides of this one, you see that the anti-reverse is not in the frame here. It's up in the, I believe it's up in the spinner head. And then on the rods that have that are two-piece, that can be split into two pieces, they have an internal anti-reverse, much like 202s and 404s and that kind of thing, and they don't have that annoying click. You can't get rid of that click unless you monkey around and change, and actually alter the thing. This one runs quiet. So if you have one of the one piece, that difference in the anti-reverse seems to correspond with when they went to the two-piece rod. So two-piece rods got the good anti-reverse, the one piece not so good. So that's another difference that I've noticed. And like I said, I'm not positive, but every two-piece I've found had the good anti-reverse. Every one piece has the clicker and the not so desirable anti-reverse. So I'm going to go ahead and tear this apart. There isn't much to them, but if we're going to do these videos, we might as well, beyond just talk about them, might as well show how to service them, because in the final analysis there might be folks out there that don't get inside reels very often, and maybe they found one of these in the barn and want to get it fixed up and just like to take a peek inside via video before they get inside it themselves. So this one's pretty farm fresh. So we'll get the handle off. We'll get the spinner head off here, taking off the nut there. And that just gets our spinner head off. Now you really should loosen your drag up as loose as it'll go before you try to take the spool off. That'll take the pressure off of this drag lever here, right there. So there's not as much pressure on the edge of that spool. And then there's there is a little clip in here that you have to winkle out of there to get the spool out. Oh, come on. Okay, take that little clip out of there. Then you can just pull the spool off, and there's your pinion gear and axle shaft. Put that in the parts tray. The main gear will slide out, so that can go in the parts tray for cleaning. That's all you really want to take apart. There's your frame there, so that can go in the parts tray. And then you want to get all of this fishing line, old nasty line, off of there. There. That can go in the parts tray, and so can that. So there really isn't much difference to the post 1967 version that has this. It's just that you would slide this out of the way to get the, after you take that nut and then all that off, when you pull the axle shaft with the pinion gear out, you just have to move this little keeper out of the way, and then that'll pull out. And when you reassemble it, you got to make sure this little arm that's on the pinion gear shaft sticks in that little hole, because then when you move it backwards, it causes this into this lever to engage with the teeth in the pinion gear, and that's what keeps it from going in reverse. And then this kind of holds everything in place. So I'm not going to make a separate video for this one in all likelihood, but that's how you would, this one's actually already been serviced anyway. Well, I've got this one because I might install this in one of the pre-1967 ones, because I just don't like that constant clicking all the time. I like this anti-reverse mechanism better, and I got this as a part, basically nothing else with it, just this. And so I might be able to convert one of the older ones to a better system. But at any rate, there's pretty much all the parts, and they're ready to go over to the sink, where they will be scrubbed with Dawn dishwashing soap. Some of the tough grease will be squirted with WD-40. Of course, that's rinsed off with soap so that there's no WD-40 residue. Get down into all of the journals with the cotton swab and so on and so forth, and be right back just like that. Okay, let's start getting all of our parts out here, so you can see again what all's to the thing. Not much. I didn't get all, somebody had, for whatever reason, I have no idea. Maybe they were trying to keep what was left of the plastic wrap on, but somebody had put some tape between the reel and the wood handle, and I haven't got all that off there yet, but I'll probably, like I said, dip that in black. But the handle's held on with a screw here, so there certainly didn't need tape to hold it on. But at any rate, here's our frame, or whatever you want to call it, and we can go ahead and grease our main gear. Just pack the teeth good with grease there, and then oil the shaft, and pop that into place there, and work that in. And then we're ready for our pinion gear and axle shaft. I'm going to pack some grease into the pinion gear. I'm going to lift that up and get some oil underneath there, and up there, and on here. Work that oil in. And then we can go ahead and insert that into place. Turn the main gear to mesh the gears. At that point, we're ready to put our spool back into place. Our drag is completely off, but that little thing's gonna, you want to kind of pull back on that a little bit to get it to set up on top of the teeth on the spool there. So it sets, and you can hear your drag clicker as it runs across those teeth. At this point, we can put our clip back on to keep the spool in place. That's in place. Now we can, let's see, dum-dum, you got to get your spool on first. It's a D-shaped axle shaft and a D-shaped opening on the spinner head. And put the nut back in place. We can put our handle here temporarily while we tighten down we can put our handle on all together if we want, but get that nut tightened down. And now we can put our handle nut on. I don't usually use pliers, but oh well, I'm being careful. I'm not buggering it up too bad. Add a couple of drops of oil, and I've already run WD-40 through there to kind of get some of the gunk out. And now I'm running some oil through there for lubrication. And there's always a bunch of nasty black gunk come out the bottom, so just wash that on through. But that'll keep those from squeaking, and it'll give you a nice smooth retrieve. One thing that I should have done that I didn't do, so I'm going to take this, couple things actually. I'm going to take this spinner head back off, and I needed to lubricate this mechanism here that drops the spinner head back down. I want to lubricate that, but I also wanted to add some grease to the spindle around which the spool rides, because that spool does in fact turn on there when the drag is being used. So, and you can get a little around the bottom too. You don't have to goop it all up. You can actually put a little grease on this drag arm here too, if for nothing else, to protect it from corrosion. But then we'll get our, that'll just give a little lubrication to the spool. So now we get our pin back on there and put this back in place. And get our nut back in there. All right. Everything's working fine. The way you put these back together is rather simple, but you should put the guts of the thing into the rear cover housing first, and then you take the front cover, and of course the rod's attached to that, and you clip it on there like that, bring it on down, push it together, and then to get this to snap in, you just push right here. You don't have to try to force this down or twist it and so on. You just push right here and it'll pop in on its own. And quite frankly, I should take a little wire wheel or Dremel. I'll probably clean this up, get the rust off here, and maybe put, I don't know, some clear coat or grease on that, because these tend to rust. But there you have it, with its annoying anti-reverse and all. A fully serviced and ready to fish, fun little, although marketed for kids, makes for a fun little ultralight pan fishing outfit on a little kayak or something like that, or something to just throw in the truck. Little nostalgia coupled with some fun ultralight action with a vintage 1970s Zebco 77. And I'll have a video coming up where I show these in action, how much fun they can be.